So welcome everybody. My name is Kerry Goddard. I'm the director of the Equality Impact Investing Project. I'm delighted, along with our co-host, the Centre for Knowledge Equity and Big Society Capital, to welcome you to this really important event today on letting go. How can we shift power and impact investing and philanthropy? The Equality Impact Investing Project was really delighted to get involved in this, mostly because Equality Impact Investing for us is not just an end, it's a means. And shifting power and participation is one of our central principles. Now, in a minute, I'm going to hand to our co-host to share a few thoughts as to why they got involved. But I'm just going to, before I do that, just briefly run through the agenda. So after we've heard from Baljit and Philippe, we're going to open with our interview with Ben and Meg, the authors of Letting Go, and they're going to be interviewed by Chloe. Then we're going to have a panel of insights and provocations from some leading voices in the UK. And finally, so please be thinking about this as we go through the event today. We'll be asking you to share your thoughts about what needs to happen next. Just in terms of technical things, we'd really encourage you to use the Q&A function when you want to ask questions after the interview, and the Q&A function when you want to ask questions to the second panel. However, you might want to use the chat function when we get into the discussion at the end. But that's all from me. I'd just like to hand over initially to Baljit Sandhu, who is the Chief Executive of the Centre for Knowledge Equity.
Oh, thank you so much, Kerry, and welcome everyone. So I'm Baljit from the Centre, but I would like to just say a huge thank you to the brains behind this event, and it was Manpreet Vig who brought us all together as collaborators for this joint event. Manpreet's part of our Centre team, and also an associate of the 2027 programme we co-founded that brings working class practitioners with lived experience into decision-making roles in the UK funding sector. And actually Manpreet was one of our first placements in the impact investing space with Big Society Capital. I've also had the absolute pleasure of sharing many conversations with Ben and Meg, who are the amazing authors of the Letting Go book, and also getting a chance to have a sneaky peek of the first draft when I was asked to comment on it earlier this year. I've also had the privilege of working with so many of the inspiring leaders and organisations cited in the book, and there was also a great example of a UK case study in there that we were part of co-designing. But today I have the honour of also chairing the second half of this event, where we will hear more from and bring it back home and hear more from key leaders and innovators in the UK, working hard to address and dismantle power that has long often stifled progression in the impact investing arena. So it's a delight to collaborate with EIIP and BSC as allies for this event, and we inhabit very unique but interconnected spaces, and it's great to be with you all. Welcome to the party, and I hope you all enjoyed today's event.
Philippe.
Thanks, Kerry. Thank you, Baljit. Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many joining this event. I will echo Baljit's big thank you to everyone, particularly Manpreet, who contributed to this event. It's great to see sort of come this together. I guess a few words of why we participate. I lead the impact team within Big Society Capital, and a lot of the sort of conversations I often participate in about impact investing in the international space, about standardized impact measurement, and you know how we therefore can better respond to asset owners' needs in terms of asset capital allocation. What's less talked about and often absolutely missing is the importance, I guess, and the role that user voice and lived experience play if we want our investments to truly be impactful and ultimately contribute to a more equitable world. And I think that's why we support this event. I guess it's fantastic just to add to see also many of the examples in terms of existing practice coming to life and be shared today. And I'm personally really looking forward to that. It's worthwhile saying as BSC, you know, from what place are we sort of supporting this? I guess it's a place of support. Like I said, we think this is crucial to our industry. It's a place of acknowledgement that there's a lot we need to learn. And thirdly, I think it's a place of acknowledging also that the role that we play if this conversation is ultimately about power dynamics as a sort of key funder in this space. With that, yeah, I hope you will enjoy the event, and back to you, Kerry.
Oh, thank you very much, colleagues. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first session, and I'd like to introduce Chloe Hardy, who is Deputy Director at the Sheila McKechnie Foundation, who's very kindly offered to interview the authors of Letting Go, Meg Massey and Ben Roble. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Chloe to start that conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. So yeah, I'm Chloe. I work with the Sheila McKechnie Foundation. For the past 4 years, the Sheila McKechnie Foundation has been investigating the power that people grow when they come together to make change, whether that's a small grassroots campaign, an established charity, or a global movement. And for the past 2 years, our power sharing project has focused largely on how the more formal social sector helps or hinders people with direct experience of poverty and inequality who want to make change. So that is why I was absolutely delighted when I read Letting Go, which looks at how power could operate better and to better advantage within social investment models. And I found that there was a really strong resonance with our own findings in the themes and the challenges and the remedies that it identifies. So let me introduce the authors to you. Meg Massey is a long-time journalist and writer and founder of Sandspur, a social sector strategy firm. And Ben Roble is communications director at Village Capital, which he joined from a past life in progressive advocacy. Now, several months before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Meg and Ben met up at a conference for impact investors. And during the course of their conversation, the idea for this book was born. So let me start by asking both of you, either one of you, could you just talk to us a bit about why you felt this book was needed and why now?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Chloe, thank you. Manpreet, I again just want to thank Manpreet for doing so much work to put this event together. So I'm Ben. I have been working in the social sector for 10 years. I spent the first few years working for the NAACP, the largest civil rights organization in the United States. And then I transitioned over to where I work now, Village Capital. We are a nonprofit. We run an accelerator that invests in tech startups, but the way we do it is participatory. We ask groups of entrepreneurs to get together and decide which of their peers should essentially get our money. And the reason we do it is because tech and impact investing is very white, very male. There's one stat that more than half of global venture capital funding goes to 3 states in the United States. So the idea for this book came about because we are doing something different to democratize how decisions are made in entrepreneurship, and sort of set out to find out who else is doing this. Meg and I sort of connected there, and the timing was just kind of fascinating because as we were writing the book, of course, we came into a global pandemic. We sort of found ourselves in this global movement for Black lives, and the social sector in a lot of people's eyes is at a moment of reckoning. Folks in both philanthropy and in impact investing, one leader told us that a lot of foundations were running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to figure out what can we do now. As it happened, we were writing a book about some real tangible solutions to make the sector more equitable. I'll pass it over to Meg.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. And as Ben said, thank you to Manpreet and everyone else for pulling this event together. I also have spent about 10 years in the social sector, and one trend that I noticed over time was that there was a lot of discussion in that space about the what of impact, looking at what was receiving investment, how to measure that, but there was a lot less about the how. Often when we were in conversations about how to change funding, it ended up pivoting a lot to diversity, hiring more women, people of color, which is a great idea. We should be doing that, but the bigger challenges is getting those voices from outside voices in the room while decisions are being made. Who is part of those decisions, not simply who is being hired as a member of staff. So that was for me, that was a big part of this journey when we set out. And as Ben said, it ended up intersecting with these much bigger global conversations that made this book all the more important for us to write now.
Great, thank you. So tell me, so in the book, one of the bits that really stuck with me, I suppose, that stood out, you talk about two core arguments for why participatory funding is valuable and important, which you call the inside and the outside arguments. Could you give us a summary of each one and just maybe talk a bit about how they play with different people?
Absolutely. So the inside argument is the argument that bringing participatory models, bringing in lived experience to funding decisions, it's more efficient and it's more effective. When you have people who are going to be users of a product or service, beneficiaries, when they're involved in the process, they're not only invested in the outcome, but you're more likely to design something that would meet their needs. They are the experts on what those needs are. That also includes impact measurement and management, making sure that everyone is on the same page about what success looks like and what the desired impact is, so that you don't end up managing to an imperfect North Star. And we found that this resonated with a lot of leaders who were very steeped in strategic philanthropy, very data-driven, metrics-driven models, who are genuinely looking for, how can we optimize impact per dollar. We found simply that it makes intuitive sense, and there is evidence to support the fact that if you ask people what they need and then bring them into the process of creating it, you end up with a more successful outcome.
Yeah, and just to build on that, in our book we talk about some of the data behind participatory funding comes from the world of government, from the world of participatory budgeting. Participatory budgeting is something that's happening more and more in countries around the world. Barcelona just passed a law around it. And there is data that when you involve citizens in decision-making processes in government, you'll get better outcomes. And for those who want to look more into it, there's a lot of studies around Porto Alegre in Brazil in the 1980s. For about 2 decades, they did a lot of participatory budgeting, and they saw infant mortality rates go down. They saw healthcare healthcare improve. There's a growing amount of evidence in the social sector that participatory funding works. But there's also a lot of data from government from that side. As far as the second argument, the moral argument, in our minds, it's just as important. There is, I think, a growing awareness inside philanthropy and impact investing that not only is there a need to make processes more equitable, but I think we've especially seen in the next sort of rising generation, the next generation where there's this $80 trillion wealth gap coming soon and a new generation of philanthropists rising, that there's almost a sense that, it's not our money. There's this acknowledgement of a sense of extraction of where some of the wealth has come from. There's, even today with neocolonialism, there's this concept of aid in reverse, with trillions of dollars being extracted from countries around the world. And there's this sense of, what can we do? We've talked to a lot of individual philanthropists, we've talked to a lot of foundations and investment funds. And I do think, like Meg was saying, conversations tend to get stuck at the improved diversity point, which is incredibly important. But I think people sort of deep down know that that's not the full answer. So we really set out, we can talk about it, but we set out to really say, well, what does it look like to actually shift power? And that's what our book got into.
So it's kind of tapping into, zeitgeist seems too light a word for it, but certainly like a developing morality or ethics of new generations, people who are sort of seeing the world through slightly different eyes, through their own context as well. That's really interesting. So sticking with the value of people being in the process, very specifically, two of the primary reasons that I suspect other people in this webinar hear from people who are more cautious about the participatory funding approach, or really any participatory approach, is that they're sort of versions of either it takes too long, or it costs too much, or a little bit of both. Yet organisations are often willing to pay a premium for learned or professional experience, but they don't necessarily seem to value other forms of knowledge and expertise in quite the same way, certainly to the point where they may be willing to invest in them. So could you talk to us a bit about why compensating people for their time and their advice and their expertise and investing the necessary time in building those relationships and mutual understanding that's so necessary to this process is actually worthwhile?
Yes, absolutely. It's incredibly worthwhile. We talk about in the book the difference between learned and lived expertise. You can have learned expertise from going to university, having many years of experience in a particular field, but that is often treated as the only expertise that's worthwhile, that matters, that's worth paying money for. When in fact, somebody who has lived in a neighborhood their whole life, they have a PhD in that neighborhood. That is incredibly valuable. And I think there's also a sense of, and we talk about this in the book, the difference between feedback and ownership. And that's a really important distinction. We cite an American social scientist named Sherry Arnstein, who developed what's called the ladder of participation in the 1960s when she was looking at strategies for desegregation in the United States. And feedback is what a lot of social sector leaders ask for now. They'll go to a community and say, "What do you think?" And if it's like when you get a customer service feedback form, from a company, you can fill it out, you can share things, but you don't know how they're going to use it. So for somebody who is, unemployed or underemployed, who has childcare challenges, who they're going to be asking themselves quite rightly, well, why should I spend my time doing this if I don't know how this information is going to be used? I don't know if you're going to value the insights that I offer you. And it discourages participation, and it also allows social sector leaders, who are often very well intentioned, to say, well, we had a town hall, we had a survey, and nobody filled it out, or this is what we heard, so we're going with that. And sometimes you'll also end up getting just the people who have, the time and money to show up at those things. They'll be the only ones contributing their insights, and that misses out on the other people in that neighborhood or who are part of that community. So there's we profile in the book the Boston Ujima Fund, which is a really fascinating, they're the first democratic investment fund in the United States. And they are, their investors include people in a group of neighborhoods in Boston, as well as other people who just think the fund is a great idea. They can contribute as much money as they want. Residents can invest for as little as $50, but it's only the residents of that neighborhood who get to vote how the money is invested. And with that, because it's going to be invested in economic development in that neighborhood. And when we spoke to the leaders of, when we spoke to the fund manager, Lucas Turner Owens, former fund manager now, he's since left, but when we spoke to Lucas, he said, we engaged so much with the community in building a pipeline, doing our due diligence. And the thinking was that if someone says, I would really like there to be a grocery store or a different broadband internet service, you have to believe that those people will then become users of that service if you're able to provide it. So it's also very, I think, very smartly a different way of approaching due diligence.
Yeah, and just to bring it to another example, on the philanthropy side, there's a fund we talk a lot about called the Disability Rights Fund. It was created about 10 years ago as a fully participatory philanthropic grant maker. The idea came out of the fact that disabled people who represent an enormous part of the global population are often treated as sort of objects acted on in philanthropy. There's this idea that they need to be cared for, not lifted up and empowered. So a group of activists came together and created a foundation that would be governed 50% by donors and 50% by a board of disabled activists from around the world. And what it's been, they still 10 years in consider themselves in beta mode. It's been a process of constantly iterating and revisiting all of their assumptions about what does true representation look like, what does true, what are the best ways to actually engage communities in an authentic way. And some of the things that they've realized is, yes, it's very important to compensate people. Just to get into specifics, and by the way, we can share our emails and anyone can follow up and we can share more resources because you can get into the weeds all day, but we've seen daily stipends, we've seen hourly stipends. One organization that does this, we've seen for the course of a few days, they give a $500 stipend. We've seen a lot of things around cell phone compensation, travel compensation, childcare. That's something that's really important if you're going to be asking a representative group of people to come and bring their expertise. You want to make sure that, for instance, working mothers are able to participate. But ultimately, the end result of all this participation is not only what we talked about, more equitable decision making, more effective decisions, but there are these knock-on effects of teaching, this word is not great, but capacity building, right? Sort of teaching lived experience leaders sort of the language and the culture of funding, because it can be really opaque. And I think often artificially opaque with different terms and cultures that folks aren't familiar with. And I know that in Baljit's report, she found that the experience for lived experience leaders was unhealthy and harmful, and there was a damaging disconnect between people receiving funding and people giving it. And bringing folks into, it's harder these days with Zoom, but when you can, bringing folks into a room, being able to have sort of casual conversations at a water cooler between someone who works at a foundation and someone who is a lived experience leader, there are all sorts of benefits to just bringing folks into that world and sort of opening the doors in more ways than one.
Fantastic, thank you. So better outcomes theoretically for the intention of your investment, better, and sort of, I suppose capacity building both parties very much, so sort of building that mutual understanding. Just a little reminder to people, if they want to ask Ben or Meg a question, pop it in the Q&A, and we're going to come to that in a few minutes. So lots of people in our audience might agree with everything you've just said, everything you've written, but they still may feel powerless as individuals to make any significant change themselves, because of course we all work within these wider systems in layers. And those restrict and enable our decisions. So what would you advise someone who finds themselves in that position? I'm buying into everything that you're saying, but I don't control every aspect of my organization. Where could I start?
Yes, of course. And we, in the later chapters of the book, we talk about actions that individuals can take, whether on their own with their own money or as part of larger organizations. I should say a number of the philanthropies that we profile started by either giving grants to a participatory fund or piloting it with a single pot of money. So I don't think, even the funds that ended up transitioning fully to a participatory model, that's a years-long process, right? It doesn't start overnight. So what's most important is taking that first step. When Ben and I were doing our research, we identified 3 decision points in the funding process where we're bringing in lived experience and community leadership is really critical. And I'm going to go through them on the investment side, but they're analogous to philanthropy as well. So take out your funding flow chart, and the first one is the investment thesis. What problem are you trying to solve, and how do you think you can solve it? Who is helping to set that? How are you defining and measuring success? The Big Society Capital and the Young Foundation put out a report, I believe last year, that went through the different areas of fund design and how user experience can be factored in. So we cite that report in the book, and I definitely recommend checking it out. So that's the first step, and some funds do this for every new round that they raise, or they set priorities every year, every few years, but making sure that process is making sure that other voices are part of that process. The second is building a pipeline. So where and how are you sourcing potential investments? This is where I'm sure a lot of folks on this call are familiar with the stats that it's mostly white men in the global north with the money, and it's mostly entrepreneurs who are also white men in the global north who get it. So there's a lot of research on the dynamics of that and how to change them, but we think it's just critically important to not limit yourself to your own network, to people that you know. Think about who else will be impacted by your investment thesis, by your goals. Bring those voices in, and it often means being an outsider, going into spaces where you may have not been before and being uncomfortable, but that's a key part of building that trust. And it's ultimately going to pay dividends because you'll be able to identify opportunities that aren't being seen. And then the last step is voting and vetting. So this is literally how a funding decision is made. We talk about peer selected investment, which Village Capital has really pioneered that model. There's also bringing in, making community members part of a due diligence process, or we're also expanding an investment committee. We profile one fund, the Olamina Fund, which is based in California, and they invest in financial institutions that serve communities of color in the United States. And they created an auxiliary advisory committee to their investment committee and so they get to vote on decisions just like the investment committee. And simply adding seats to an investment committee sometimes is the most straightforward way for funds to start. We recommend obviously looking at your whole process, but they take a while. They do take time and investment to really make them part of your process, but they're also fairly straightforward. So pick a place to start and then start.
Just start. Ben, did you have anything to add before we?
Yeah, no, I mean, just to give one more, just a very tangible example. There's a foundation called Thousand Currents in the United States. It was created by former Peace Corps volunteers who were really frustrated with the sort of top-down international aid model. And in 2014, they've been doing grant making for years. They realized that a lot of their partners who were indigenous sort of local banks and organizations, they actually needed loans to succeed, not just grants. And they also recognized that the traditional model for impact investing was just not going to work for them. So they set out to create an investment fund from scratch, and they ended up calling it the Buen Vivir Fund. Buen Vivir means well-being. And the way they did it was a year-long co-creation process with dozens of their lived experience leaders from around the world. They had they kind of culminated in a weekend-long event in Mexico City, where they got folks from 6 countries to come and really just talk for a weekend about the best way to structure the fund. And the end result was a fund that chooses loans and investments through a members assembly made up of 18 voting members. 10 of the members are grassroots leaders from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. 8 of the voting members are institutional investors. And there's some really creative ways around who approves the loan, who recommends loans. But it really is, I think, a good example of the Buen Vivir Fund of a really thoughtful balance between, yes, you do have traditional experts, right, who are saying, okay, here is a set of loans that we think make sense, that their financials are sound, and this is a good sort of subset to choose from. But then ultimately the final decisions are made by this broader group. And they just recently ran their first investment cycle. They invested $1 million. I don't want to also scare folks away in that you have to spend 1 year, and hundreds of hours creating these processes. There's also examples of foundations like the Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Hewlett Foundation. In the UK, the National Community Lottery Fund. All of these foundations have piloted participatory funds with small amounts of money. And you start small, you can grow big.
That's brilliant. We've got a few questions that have come through, so we're going to spend the last few minutes on those. I know one of our attendees had a question to ask. So Nick Temple says, we often manage loan and grant funds for other organisations. They often set what the management fees and costs should be. But if this type of work requires more resource, how do we make the case to them? Essentially, I guess that they need to invest more in the process. Don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of sort of thinking about which argument is most effective to them. The inside argument, the outside argument. There's a report, Nick, that I'd be happy to send over called Deciding Together that gets really in the weeds on some of these details. But there are ways to frame the conversation around that. Yes, it's going to cost more upfront to develop these relationships, to find facilitators. There's some really interesting things around hiring for more facilitative for facilitators rather than sort of analysts. But ultimately, if you're going to be more efficient in the long run, these relationships that you build will sort of compound. So I think there are some ways to frame it that can ultimately speak to the long run benefits.
That's great. And Sally says, talking about giving power to people with lived experience. Often people get the theory, but don't want to be the person who gives up their own power. So I wonder if either of you have any words of wisdom for someone dealing with someone who doesn't want to let it go.
Yeah, one of the titles of the book while we were still writing it was humility, because that is really what a lot of this comes down to. And I mean, we're not therapists, we can't teach that, but I think there's a real but I think what we've been telling a lot of people is that your experience, whatever that may be, your expertise is still valuable. It's just as valuable as somebody else's, right? So if you're, I'm a middle-class white woman with a liberal arts degree. It's not that my knowledge doesn't matter, but I am definitely not in a position to tell someone halfway around the world who's, a different ethnicity, different gender, whatever, that, what will fix all their problems. It's recognizing yourself, but recognizing what you can see, and seeing it as you're strengthening together rather than in working in opposition. And that goes back to the root of a lot of the solutions we talk about in the book, which is building trust. And I think ceding power to a complete stranger, a group of strangers, that's scary in any context for a lot of people. But if you've built that trust and built those relationships, and you're able to kind of face down, your own preconceived notions or biases, and they're able to see what your intentions are, that ultimately that pays dividends in this and also in life.
I think that's a nice way to end it. It pays dividends in this and in life. We've run out of time. There were more questions that we can get through. I'm sorry, a lot of them came through at the last minute. But hopefully we can cover some of that ground in the rest of the event.
We can type some answers too. Yeah.
Sorry?
We'll type some answers. We can type some answers as the event goes on. Yeah.
That would be absolutely amazing. Yeah. So keep an eye on the chat, and we'll get back to some of the people who ask questions. Thank you so much to Ben and Meg.
Thank you. Thank you.
And yes, let's crack on with the rest of the event. Back over to our hosts.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me. Can somebody wave if they can hear me? My camera's been turned off.
We can hear you, Kerry.
Sorry, yeah, hi. So thank you. Can I just thank the authors and really thank, again, Chloe Hardy from Sheila McKechnie Foundation. So we've heard from them, but we thought it'd be fantastic to hear now some insights on some of those issues here from the UK. And I think some provocations as well. And who better to share this session than Baljit Sandhu? So I shall hand over to her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kerry, and Ben and Megan and Chloe. I mean, it's such an incredible, beautifully simple book that has those tangible examples. So, and now it's time to bring it back to the UK, folks, to really explore the UK investment and funding landscape. I know that we've touched on an example from the UK, but there's been a lot of work going on, and often it can be invisible. So, what journey are we on? Where are we heading? Most of all, what are the exciting possibilities if we work together to address this call for action that is letting go of power. So I wanted to dive straight into the session. So I don't know if the, and not hear from me, but our incredible panelists that we have, and if we can have them all join us, that would be incredible. And to see us all together, but I will turn to you all. We have just an incredible panel with us. We have Ishita Rajan, who is the Senior Project Manager at Good Finance and Director of Spark & Co. Ben Rick, who's the co-founder and CEO of Social and Sustainable Capital. We have Fawad Mohammed, who's the CEO of ACH, an award-winning social enterprise and co-founder of the Lex Movement, and Derek Bardwell, CEO of 10 Years Time and a Knowledge Equity Fellow at the University of Oxford. So I do want to first turn to Ishita. Ishita brings over a decade of experience in the social enterprise sector and a strong record of managing and delivering complex projects to create social change. She's an incredibly thoughtful and humble individual and really passionate about this role of the role we all play as individuals in understanding and tackling society's pressing issues. But as the Senior Project Manager at Good Finance, Ishita leads on a lot of the user voice work that we've already heard that has been mentioned, but which is an integral part of Good Finance's user-led approach that also helps to inform the work of other social impact investors. But actually, Ishita also is a new director of Spark & Co, a new entrepreneur, which she founded in response to COVID-19 crisis and the disproportionate effect it was having on UK Black and minoritized communities. So Ishita, please, can you, I can't see you on the screen. I hope we will be able to see you on the screen. I'm hoping you could share a little bit about the work you've been spearheading within BSC and Good Finance to really help hold up this mirror to our own practices, to shift this power dial that Ben and Meg illuminate in their book. But briefly, if possible, if we have time, share a little bit about your own experiences now of walking in the shoes of a woman of colour, leading a social enterprise during the pandemic, and the benefits of that in your social change toolbox, if any.
Thank you, Baljeet. I think that's one of the nicest introductions I've ever heard. I would love to turn my camera on, but I'm getting a note that says host is disabled. So if somebody could let me turn my camera on, that would be wonderful. The anticipation.
We are just working on this. Sorry for a small technical glitch. Bear with us.
Fine. The thing is, Katie, I put some lipstick on and did my hair today, so
that's what
feeling very passionate about turning my camera on. I'll start because I'm conscious of time.
That'd be great, Ishita, if you could, and hopefully you'll magically appear on the screen. But if you can, that would be amazing.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. Well, let me get going. So I am conscious of time, and there is a million things that I want to say about this topic because it's possibly one of my favorite things in the world to not just talk about, but to practice. And I will start with my time at Big Society Capital. So I am coming up to 3 years now at Big Society Capital. And I think I'd like to start by saying that never in a million years did I imagine that I would end up working somewhere like Big Society Capital. So it's been a real journey and a real education for me. When I first started at BSC, I met the most remarkable woman that went by the name Lisa Hilder, who you may have heard us mention before. And Lisa came to the offices and did some filming for us, and she spoke to us about Preston Roads Women's Centre, of which she was a trustee. And Preston Roads Women's Centre is just the most incredible organisation. They have a big purple house, and they support and provide advice to women in Hull with various complex needs. And it's very much a multi-purpose organisation that's run by women for women, offering a wide range of services under one roof. And one of the things that I was really struck by speaking to Lisa is actually just the track record of success that Preston Road Women's Centre had in sort of enabling and equipping women to be able to sort of move on to to be able to move on from complex situations. So it was a really particular joy for me to then see Lisa's relationship with Big Society Capital develop. And a little while after my first conversation with her, she then took on the role supporting Big Society Capital developed the UK's first gender lens housing fund. And BSC played a role here as a convener and a seed investor, and very much tapped into Lisa's expertise to develop this. Oh, here we go. See, did my hair. And so around this time, Big Society Capital also recruited their first 2027 associate, Manpreet, who I believe is actually on this call, and everyone's given a nod to him. So I'll join in and say thank you so much, Manpreet, for bringing us all together for this conversation. And Manpreet, when he is not doing an incredible job organising events, brings with him some very deep-rooted understanding of the housing sector, of working within marginalised communities, of working with marginalised people. And Manpreet very much brought this expertise with him. And along with Lisa Hilda, those two kind of expertise of both professional and lived experience really helped develop that first ever UK's first ever gender lens housing fund. And BSC continues to play sort of a supporting and convening role in the fund, and along with key stakeholders, and people like Lisa and Manpreet continue to be involved. And since then, Lisa's actually gone on, her relationship with BSC has continued, and she's actually gone on to become a member of our investment committee, which is absolutely incredible. And it's incredible that she, has that voice, that we get that expertise and that diversity of thought on our investment committee. And Lisa, as ever an inspiration, has gone on to inspire another internal initiative called Investment Committees of the Future, though caveat that is a working title, because the work is very much in development. And what we are looking at is how we can build and grow the investment committees of the future, to bring that diversity of thought, that diversity of expertise, of knowledge, from people like Lisa, but so many other people out there that could be sitting on investment committees and, could be bringing some incredible expertise to influence decision and to influence, ultimately where capital is invested. So that's
Ishita, I just want to say, I mean, you've been an amazing sport, but I'd love you, with the short 30 seconds we have before we move on, I'd love you to share a little bit about your own experiences. Now you've actually dived into being an entrepreneur yourself.
Yes, absolutely. So for the last year, I have been running, alongside Good Finance, have been working for Spark & Co. Spark & Co is a COVID-19 response organisation. We realised very quickly that the pandemic was going to have a disproportionate effect on ethnic minority communities up and down the country. And so a lot of our work in the past year has been around things like vaccine hesitancy, racial trauma that's resurfaced, mental health, and digital exclusion in communities. And so it's been really interesting for me for the past year to be straddling these two worlds, to be sitting, within Good Finance, within Big Society Capital, sitting in the rooms at the tables where we're having discussions about things like diversity and inclusion and lived experience, and then to be out there practicing it and living it. And something that I learned very quickly running Spark & Co, because the stakes were very high for us. We were a COVID-19 response organisation. We now have moved into recovery, but the stakes were very high for us. And we had to get it right for the people in the communities that we were serving. And so something that I really want to challenge is this kind of, a lot of people believe that this work is expensive or time consuming or very complex. And my kind of challenge is that it is not. Everything you do, if you do this work, it makes everything that you do so much better, so much more impactful, and it does not have to take as much time and as money as you think it's going to take. And I say that as someone that runs a very small social enterprise, that we have managed to compensate every one of the people that we work with. But we also have really managed to make sure that 95% of the people that we work with bring lived experience to the design and the development of what we do. And so a big thing for me is that letting go and shifting power, it needs to be part of the DNA of the organisation. It needs to be embedded into everything that we do. And in order to do that, you have to take a really active role in letting go. It sounds like a really passive thing, but it's not a really passive thing. And one of the kind of questions earlier was, you know, a lot of people don't actually like letting go. And that's because it is actually a really conscious, a really active thing to let go of power. And the last thing that...
And please do. Yeah, no, the last quick point before we actually start. Yeah, no, not at all.
The last thing I want to finish on is just there is so much joy in this work. I have learnt more, listened more, and become so much better at my job because I have let go. And there is so much joy in doing that. There's so much joy in listening. And I think we need to bring that back to the conversation, is that that's where the joy in our work lies. It's when you're out there, it's when you are letting go of power and you are listening to the people in the communities that you work with.
Oh, Ishita, thank you so much. And you've been such a good sport despite, and I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much. I'm going to Zoom now because of timings as well and honouring everyone's time. But thank you, Ben. If I can have you join us, hopefully you're going to come up on the screen. Ben, we're going to flip it now. You're your academic and 20 years of practice experience in the city brought you to the world of impact investing. And so this thing about why is it so, the anxieties and hesitations of letting go of power. We often hear about shifting power, sharing power is definitely something that charity sector has been talking about, but your work is really focused on, well, we've got to let go of power and how you did that. So if you could share a little bit about your award-winning work, some tangible reasons about this perceived difficulty and how you shifted and moved the dial forward and what it's meant for your work.
Oh, sure, with pleasure. So thank you very much, Baljit. So yeah, as Baljit said, my name is Ben Rick. I'm the co-founder and CEO of an impact investing firm called Social and Sustainable Capital, otherwise known as SASC. And I'm going to talk briefly about how letting go helped our business. So SASC started life in 2012. We launched our first funds in 2014 with significant support from one of today's hosts, Big Society Capital. And we work exclusively with charities and social enterprises in the UK. And the main aim of every investment we make is to generate both social impacts and financial returns. So to date, we've made about 65 investments equivalent to about £140 million. And our organisation has been on an amazing journey, but honestly, until a couple of years ago, it was not all that clear that we actually would make it. And our turn of fortune is directly related to the topic of today's discussion. So if you go to our website, you'll see our tagline on the homepage. It says, "Finance for good, the same but totally different." We wrote that line recently, and it sums up a long process of navigating our way through the challenges of being a social investor. Now, we didn't think of it in these terms when we wrote it, but it could equally have said finance for good, letting go of power. And I thought I'd just explain why. So the first few years at SASC were spent frantically trying to find and convince social sector organisations to work with us. But by the end of 2015, we'd only managed to make 4 investments totaling £2.5 million. And given our business plan had promised investors 20 loans or approximately 20 million, it was not an auspicious start. We were scratching our heads. We'd set up shop with a significant pot of money, a credible track record in mainstream finance and buckets of enthusiasm. But we would have initial conversations with charities that were really promising, but most opportunities seemed to fade away when we got down to the details, what our product offer was, our due diligence process and the terms and conditions. It was really frustrating, and we used to regularly say to each other, you know, how can it be so hard to do just a little bit of good? It took us a while to realise what was happening, but the penny did finally drop. The problem was that the first interaction that a charity had with us was the best. We showed genuine interest, respect, enthusiasm for their work. Our social credentials and our motivation, I think, were actually pretty convincing. And we spoke about partnership and alignment. And, you know, to be honest, what's not to like about any of that? But it was what came next that was the problem. A product offer that was essentially the same as you would get from any mainstream finance outfit, a set of legal documents that were totally impregnable and ultimately made clear the true nature of the relationship between us as lender and them as borrower. And a due diligence process that was at the best heavy-handed and at worst totally painful for the borrower. Now, a previous boss of mine back in the big bad world of investment banking had said that God gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and I should use them in that proportion. And I think, thankfully, we realised how relevant that advice was to the predicament we found ourselves in. And in 2016, we started a listening exercise with charities. And in fact, it was run by Nick Temple, who is on the attendee list today. What we started hearing from charities and social enterprise was that they felt social investors were tone deaf. They felt they were clearly explaining to us that they needed something different, and that social investors ultimately nodded, said they understood, and then served up the exact same thing in a slightly different wrapper. The more we listened, the more we let ourselves be guided by their insights, the better things started to get for us, and our fortune started to turn. Now, in 2017, we were fortunate to meet a woman you've just heard about from the previous speaker, called Lisa Hilder from Preston Road Women's Centre. Now, it's going to sound like Lisa's uniquely responsible for turning around social investment, and that in fact may turn out to be true. But when we met her in 2017, she wanted to raise money to buy housing that would allow women and their children to flee domestic violence in Hull. Now, we were super excited about the opportunity, everyone at SAS was, and we really pulled out all the stops and made her what was the best offer we could make. Now, what was unique about the way that Lisa completely rejected us was that she could explain in detail why what we had suggested to her was no good to her. Thankfully, we recognised this rejection was another opportunity to listen and let go of our perceived constraints of an investment product, and really ultimately went on to co-design something that was genuinely different. And that process of co-design with Lisa turned out to be a pivotal moment for SAS. In 2019, we launched a fund that was powered by this genuine process of co-design. The fund is on its way to being one of the more successful high-impact social investment projects in the UK from the perspective of funds raised from investors and loans made to charities. The process of genuine design resulted in two significant outcomes for SAS. It allowed us to be the value-led organisation we hoped we would be when we set up shop in 2012. This is perhaps easy to understand given we have closely aligned our products and processes with the third sector. But it also allowed us to build a platform that is attracting commercial investors looking for a financially robust but socially ambitious way to deploy their capital. We didn't anticipate it when we started out, but our success to date has not been driven by what we could teach charities about investment. It's been about what we could learn from them, or what we are now calling letting go.
Thank you so much, Ben. Brilliant. And I'm going to now, talking of social housing and also a new investment fund and in that space, is also now introduced to the next speaker. Thank you, Ben, for that. Fawad, thank you for joining us. So Fawad is an award-winning social entrepreneur who came to the UK as a refugee from Somalia with no English, then obtained an array of first-class degrees in engineering and management, but really went on to activate his lived, learned and practiced expertise to set up ACH in 2008 to support the resettlement of refugees. I think a lot of the discussions we've been talking about, rightly so, has been about the need of participation of the communities we all purport to serve in our investment funds. But also, what about if we move from an informant model, which is often a participation model, towards a change-making model? And this is where Fawad, and I've had the honour of working with him for many years too, and together with a coalition of senior leaders across the UK, founded the Lived Experience Leaders Movement. But actually ACH then went on to build an organisation which is now the UK's leading provider of integration support for excluded and marginalised people, and works across partnership with the private, public, as well as not-for-profit agencies. And I think one of the hidden and invisible pieces of your work, Fawad, has been the innovative ethical impact investment fund you co-designed with others in the investment space. And I know this hasn't been an easy journey for you as a lived experience leader or for ACH, but once allies and partners finally started to let go of the power, the fund is now thriving. Can you share a little bit about that work, the tangible steps you took, and how you dealt with those difficult challenges together?
I could listen to you the rest of the afternoon. Thanks for saying all these good things. Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm from ACH. And as Baljeet said, what I'd really like to share with you briefly is our story of trying to design what is called a Sharia-compliant investment. So ACH works with newly arriving communities and refugees. We're based in Bristol and Birmingham. So just to give you a bit of context, we've been growing year on year. So financially, we've been a very strong organization. And in terms of impact, we really impact close to 2,000 to 3,000 people a year. So a couple of years ago, we wanted to buy a number of properties, and because of our beliefs, we did not want to go and take interest-bearing investment. So what we really wanted to do was to find a social Sharia-compliant social investment, and to our surprise, we could not find that in London. And I was just speaking to Baljeet a couple of days ago, saying, at the beginning, with a country of 10% Muslim community not to have a social investment, which is, Sharia compliant, was very surprising. So what we had to do from the ground up was to design the product, but before we've even done that, we've spoken to a number of investors in London, and to be honest, the risk is too high. What they've been saying is, the risk is too high. This is something that we don't know. We're not willing to do it. And finally, it came down to a small organization like ACH to fetch a cost of close to £100,000, a model that works. So it has taken us almost 2 to 3 years to build the model. And working with really very expensive lawyers, and also people who are from, for example, the Muslim community, to authorize that this is a Sharia compliant investment. So one thing I'm sharing with community organizations who are in the meeting today is that if you want to really make a change, sometimes, as Gandhi said, I think we have to be the change that we want, and we really have to bring that change. So for us, it actually took a number of years and a serious investment to design a simple product which is Sharia compliant, to get a small investment that we wanted. It was never about our numbers. One thing we always say at Actually Community Housing is we don't want to be seeing refugees only within the vulnerable human being context. We are people who have skills, talent, aspirations, people who can contribute to our society, people who have done great, amazing things in their home country. So when ACH was sitting in front of these investors, it was never about, could you please give us, a free money? So we were, as I said, year on year for the past 18 years, we've grown minimum 10%. So we had a strong finance numbers to show. The risk was always about, we don't understand, or we don't want to take a leap of faith in a model that we understand. And if we don't do that, if you're talking about letting go, if you're talking about shifting power, how will, so to the investors here today, how, and to the wider community, how will we do that? So it took us £100,000 plus number of years of waiting. So just to share with you since then what happened, we've been very successful with it. So we bought a number of properties, impacted close to 100 homeless people. But the biggest impact we had is the model that we have decided, yield sharing model, have since been used consistently by the wider sector, not only because it is another model or different model, which is not interest bearing, but it's seen as an ethical investment model. And I can gladly share with you, I'm aware personally close to 100 million investment since have used the model that we have designed. So just to conclude, it has been really a really painful experience. Since then, now we working on, I think he's here, Comic Relief. So we want to actually make this retail. So we want to take it down to the community level, taxi drivers, small shops who really want to take loan. If ACH found it difficult for even commercial loans, there are some banks who we know are doing, but even that, there are some difficulties, which I believe we don't have time today. So we're trying to work to make that, to get it to the community and retail it. So in conclusion, to the investors, to the finance organizations, please take the leap of faith, especially working with organizations with lived experience, people who are from the community organizations, people who don't have credit history, people who do have, who are really making the real impact. Impact investment is about the impact. Too often we ignore the impact and focus on how big the organization is and etc. So, and with the organizations, also please work with, as Baljit was saying earlier, allies. There are a lot of allies that we have found since who actually are willing to work. The whole sector is not broken. I don't believe that. There's a lot of people out there who have supported and consistently supporting us. So it's about finding these allies, working with them, and hopefully securing that investment, whether it's grant or loan.
All right, thank you so much, and always a pleasure to hear about this work and the ongoing work that you're doing and sharing that learning of that model that now isn't just serving you know, Muslim communities, but also all communities with a new ethical model that seems to be working for the greater majority and not the small few. So thank you, Fawad. And last but not least, Derek Bardwell. Derek, if you can join me. We've heard now the need to understand and involve service users, communities at the hard edge of social injustice, in the work of social investors. The steps social investors now need to take to let go of power to involve those close to the issues on the front line and co-design funds. What can then happen from Fawad, where we're shifting and letting go to actually start to shift the dial a little bit further and seeing lived experience leaders as co-designers and leaders of these and innovators of new financial products and reaching new markets. You've been heavily involved in investing and supporting key initiatives, shifting this power dial for many, many years around the world, including funding the Lived Experience Leadership Fund, which was hard to fund. Even that's a case study in the book, which is the participatory grant making model. But what if we went further, Derek? What if we let go of power to actually create space for lived experience leaders and innovators to actually design and then lead the delivery of investment funds, not just participate? And if we really want to talk about power and how far we can go, what have you witnessed? What are the possibilities for the future? And then take us out with and what's exciting you for the visions and the imaginations that you're seeing that are coming up from communities.
Thanks, Balji. You make me sound old. But you know, at 10 years' time, you know, we aim to inject ambition, imagination, and equity into funding. We do that by reducing the proximity between financial and community wealth. And you know, we want funders to think differently through advice, training, and coaching in the work that we do. But I think it's also important to note that 10 years time's team is from the communities and reflective of the issues that supposedly philanthropists and impact investors are meant to be serving. So for us, I guess we've already done a lot of letting go, and personally and professionally, and for us it's a lot about taking back at this particular point. So I just really want to emphasize where I'm coming from here. You know, look, if you're talking about philanthropy and impact investing, you're talking about an institutional approach or practice that is very paternalistic. It's exclusive, it's top down, it's so much about competition and individualism, it's about power and wealth hoarding, it's hierarchical, it's Eurocentric, and it's colonial. That's in its DNA. So we're talking about something that's really, really deep in terms of change. And at 10 years time, we're advocates for funding to be a social and cultural practice that's grounded in the knowledge, expertise, innovation, and joy of the most impacted communities. And what we're trying to do is work towards a sector that appreciates that, but where that becomes a big part of its DNA. But the fundamental problem with this is that it undermines the status quo and the current hierarchy, the current order of things. And then the reality is no one wants to give up status and privilege. People don't want to give that up. And people are afraid of things invalidating their own legacy. But what if the biggest legacy of this work is letting go? You know, and what if you think that the price you have to pay is really deep, and actually the price that you have to pay actually might not be as big as you think it might be? So if you look at this, and I'm just going to take this from some really crude stats, okay? So I don't want to boil this down to statistics, but if you figure that 6.5 billion pounds goes out from, you know, independent funding in the UK, and there's 14% of Black and brown people in this country, racially minoritized people in the UK. I can almost guarantee that 14% of 6.5 billion is not being distributed to Black and brown led organizations or companies. We know that trustees boards in charities are less diverse than FTSE 100 companies. And from a recent article from Kevin Osborne, he said in terms of arts funding, only 2.4% goes to Black and minority ethnic organizations. So just in terms of equity alone, philanthropy is not effective. Okay, so that's just the statistics. And again, I'm not boiling it down to that, and I'm not talking about quotes. I'm just talking about, if we're talking, even if we're not talking about the ethics about this, just in terms of effectiveness, we know that the current status quo is not effective. So what needs to happen to happen differently? What if we actually redefined what investment readiness, what leadership, what risk, what trust looks like fundamentally. And what we've seen is some really good examples over the last few years of organizations and initiatives and collectives who have been able to mobilize this. We've seen it from the Edge Fund, from going back a decade as among the first participatory grant makers who have designed this design their approach in a way that isn't overseen by anyone except for those that are most impacted by the social issues. And they provided early stage and seed funding to organizations like Sisters Uncut, Ubele, Black Lives Matter, and people that have been absolutely at the forefront of some of the protests over the last 12 months. We've seen it with the Phoenix Way, right, which was community mobilization from the likes of Yvonne Field, Shane Ryan, Baljit, yourself there, Baljit Banga, Saido Jurde, Naz Zaman, so many great leaders from across the UK. And part of that was down to absolute trust in our own lived realities of racial injustice. And that mobilization led to a £50 million partnership with the National Lottery Community Fund. We've seen it with Resourcing Racial Justice, where 30 Percy Foundation ceded power to Black and Brown activists to deliver this fund that went beyond participation. But this wasn't ownership. This wasn't a case of shifting from participation to ownership and this kind of binary change. This was a regenerative and equitable model of investing that got to our communities, and not just through charitable models of our communities. And we've seen this time and time and again in recent years, from the great work from Baljit, whose work and her report on the value of lived experience was the foundation of a lot of what we did in the UK portfolio, not just the Lived Experience Fund, to Imi Kerr's The Dream Fund, which supported people to unlock and resource bold, creative, regenerative ideas, right through to people like Stephanie Brobby in the Good Ancestors movement, which is all about moving capital away from extractive investments and excessive accumulation towards a more redistributive and reparational funds that can anchor a more equitable and regenerative society. And you've got people that are diversifying this sector, like the 2027 Associates Program, that brings unbelievable talent into these places. So for me, there's two routes. There are two routes. There's one which is around the deep learning and healing and undoing of our institutions, so we can start to change the DNA. And part of this is around that interrogation of wealth, the practices and approaches. Okay, and also the fact that this is not just about being ethical, but also being effective. But while that's going on, we cannot wait for these institutions to learn and undo. The investments need to go out. And I guess from me mentioning very quickly some of these great organizations, institutions, and people that are doing it, you can invest sustainably in partners with a track record in racial injustice, Black and Brown people, which is important because there's loads of intermediaries that will be jumping on this agenda at the moment, pretending like they've got a racial justice lens. And you need to enable those ideas creators to become the ideas selectors and investors. No one can tell me that there's not people out there that are doing it, because I've just mentioned a whole bunch and I know a whole bunch more. So all I would say back to people is, what's stopping you?
And Derek, I can't say thank you enough for ending up that, because Stephanie Brody, I mean, the work we're doing with academics at University of Oxford, elevating her work, that has just really had a profound effect on a lot of high net worth families who are stepping into this. You know, she's working as a woman of colour. She's igniting her live, learn, practice expertise as working in a law firm as a wealth advisor, thinking about trillions being transferred over to leaders and innovators with lived experience, so that they can take forward their innovations to make a better people and planet. And if we can get that happening, I'm sure there'll be so many communities here. The timing of this, it feels like it's like this fast pace, and I'm still like Ishata. Thank you so much, Ishata, for your patience as well. Right, we've got some questions. Kerry, you're going to help me with some of these questions, but the first one's for you, Ben. We've got a question for someone, but also someone wants to say thank you. It was wonderful to hear your story. Could you give a specific example of how your due diligence differs from traditional investing, Ben? I hope you're still with us.
Yeah, no, I'm here. So I think that on the particular fund we're talking about today, the main difference with the due diligence is we start from a position of a realistic position about what we're trying to achieve with that due diligence. So, for example, at the fund we co-designed with Lisa, oh, I've got control of my camera, I'm just saying. Really, what it sought to recognise was that as social investors, we couldn't expect the small charities to be able to generate the capital required to pay down loans. And so the way we designed that is that we use the value of the houses themselves to give us sight of the exit of the repayment mechanism. So, you know, we spent many years, you know, prior to coming up with that product, we're doing due diligence that we knew up front wouldn't give us the answer we were looking for. Yet we kind of put everyone through the pain of you know, trying to understand the strength of the balance sheet of some of the charities. So I think we make sure that when we're engaging with organisations, we're taking through a process that they can realistically satisfy before we put them through it. And you know, if you start from a position of understanding and realism, it means that the entire process should be shorter. I mean, we do lots of other things around, you know, trying to make it as efficient and as light on their time as can be. But ultimately, the main thing we can do is just make sure the product is appropriate for the people we're talking to.
Thank you so much, Ben, and so important. And sorry, I should have also said questions, answers. We may not have time. Time is quick, fast running out. I'm going to put one more question because they have been coming through the Q&A. But if please do feel free to put them in the chat. We can come back to them later. I think this is just the beginning of a conversation. The final question to you all is, there's a question about what's new in impact investing that is different from other social interventions led by the communities and funded by investors. Example, the letting go of power approach for investors. What's new in the impact investing space, which differs from other social interventions? I don't know if anybody wanted to, and Ben and Meg, it would be great that you can also be with us.
Yeah, I could try this just real quick. I think that the conversation around what is impact investing can actually be distracting because it's a bit of a buzzword, and people have been doing impact investing for a while. It's great that there's a term around it, but I think it's really about the intention of the investment being to support communities. But I'm curious for others' thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd make that point exactly. I mean, I think we can there's part of the problem is there's been too much intention on the investing part. I mean, ultimately what we're doing is we're just providing the financial support to, you know, incredibly capable and entrepreneurial organizations to do what they do best. So it's not really, the investment isn't really unlocking the outcomes. We're just allowing these organizations to unlock the outcomes. And I think that's the one thing that SAS was maybe slightly ahead of the game back in 2014, is we realized that we were the sideshow, that we were in a supporting role. And if you look in the commercial world, when you talk about McDonald's, you don't talk about, you know, the organizations that are funding McDonald's. I mean, we should be pretty invisible. If we're doing our job properly, it should be the organizations we're funding that are in the limelight and ultimately taking the credit for what they're doing. And actually that extends even further to when we talk about impact, making sure that as investors, we're not claiming the impact of the organizations we're funding. You know, we can talk about how our investment has helped that organization generate that impact, but if we're not careful, we end up almost acting as if the impact is ours.
And Ben, I think that's so important because for us as the Centre for Knowledge Equity, we found ourselves in this world, through the grant making world, through testing out participatory grant making models, the impact investing space. And even those two worlds don't even connect very well. But I think one of the most important things for us that we've witnessed is we need to shift, and why we had to force and bring lived experience as a notion to bring it into the innovation and impact space was having lived experience of a social injustice or a social problem does not make you a vulnerable person. This notion of the charity model of assuming that communities need philanthropic funding to do their work and create good. Actually, as part of the lived experience leaders movement, nearly half of our leaders are social entrepreneurs with social business. Some of them aren't even social enterprises, they're businesses doing social good. For many, it's good business. And so with that, I wanted to hand over to my colleague, Kerry, who's maybe going to even start to bring us into this kind of collective conversation.
That I am, and can thank you so much, Baljeet, and panelists again. So I'm just going to briefly summarise some of the themes that we've just heard ahead of. Of course, this is around participation in this event. We're really keen to hear from all of you. So, you know, we started off, obviously, that was a brilliant tour de force, Ben and Meg. I think being so clear about the need for this work in the UK and globally, both in terms of just being more effective, but critically being more equitable. about being more fair, and that's from every presentation, and really good arguments for both of those, and lots of practical examples, so people are doing it. The panel, some great themes there. You know, I really liked the, yes, well, they're kicking off with a shooter going, well, yes, it does need more resource, but not as much as you think, and actually it can be a more effective way of doing things. And Fouad's point, I thought, was really interesting, both to community organisers themselves to be the change, but also for investors to actually take the leap of faith and do it. I thought that was really, really interesting. It was great to hear Ben talk about genuine co-design, realizing, you know, you know, the profits from that. I mean, literally, and of course, Derek, we knew would provoke us. But again, you know, reflecting the thing that the prize is not perhaps as high as you think, but asking us really questions: what if we could really redesign things such as due diligence? And I think really critically, Derek's point, you know, this isn't a kind of wait till we've got our organisations perfect and diverse, though we really do need to do that, but we need to start getting money out the door, and we can't wait. So lots of challenges and ideas there. What we're going to suggest now, because there's so many people here, is we'd like you to just take a pause for a minute. We'd like you just to stop for about 3 minutes and just have a reflect, participants. And we'd like you to think about two questions. And then we'd like you all at the same time, I think Baljit's words were dump it in the chat in a beautiful explosion of ideas. I might be paraphrasing you, Baljit. 2 questions. Reflecting on what you've heard today or what you're feeling now, can you tell us one thing that you think you can do as an investor to shift power, and that the wider impact investor, or that the wider impacting investors sector can do? So either yourself or the wider sector. And then the second question is that we want to hear from you. What will enable you to do this, or what needs to happen to make this happen? So two questions. You can turn your cameras off for 3 minutes if you want, pot around, but please, I will be coming back to you in 3 minutes. And what I'd really like people to do is just drop their answers to those questions in the chat. I'm going to put them in there now for your reference, and then we will have a look at them. We're obviously not going to try to come to any agreement at the end. And
the beautiful part of the explosion bit is don't press send until Kerry comes back to the space, because often we can get distracted with others' comments. So reflect, have a purposeful pause, put it in the chat, don't press send. Kerry will come back and count you down, and we'll all literally press send together, and that hopefully will be the explosion of ideas.
Okay, all. So, as suggested by Baljit, I'm going to go. I'm going to count you down, and then please, can you drop in the chat your thoughts? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Very good, Jess. Okay. Deep, meaningful partnerships. Get feedback during due diligence. That's practical. Shift power to those with lived experiences. Oh, that's really good. Building it into measurement. Yeah. Be bold. We can use some of the joy for being bold, I think. Bringing another practical suggestion, or like that, lived experience actually into investment committees and due diligence reviews. Really good.
Create better mechanisms to be accountable to our investors.
Can you have a copy of the chat? Absolutely. The reason we're doing this, the chat is being captured, and I'll mention again at the end, we will produce a short note of this report, because you know you're all going to want it as a to-do list. The makeup of the sector and new recruitment approaches, yeah, really important. And I would plug the work of the Diversity Forum, who are working really hard to do that within social and impact investing. And the due diligence thing, there's another good project. If people are interested, go look at the Equality Impact Investing site at the moment. It's actually on shifting power in deal terms. Very practical project. Both Wells and Braithwaite are involved. How can you actually change the terms of deal terms so there is a less of a power imbalance at the deal making stage? Practice letting go every day. I reckon you'd be really good at that, Ishita. Okay, now I know there's more people than I've seen comments.
I also love this one, seed power. If you lead on it or go part of a power structure, bring in a co-lead, share, and eventually replace yourself.
Oh yeah, we've got ask wider group of potential investees what they think would make an organisation robust. That's very good. I think a lot of impact investors do rely on their networks and networks of networks. So yeah, just lifting up one's head a bit. And we've got somebody talking about internal practice, challenging within your organisation is really important, or at least raising it. There's always an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur. So we're still looking for some other ideas from people moving forward. A vision of transference. Derek Bardwell says we should have vision of transference. I'm going to make you write a definition of that, Derek, in the report, so we all know what a vision of transference is. If you want to elaborate in the chat now, that would be great. Okay.
And also connect with those who are doing the work already, and the work has been happening. We've got good humans, folks. Our human history illuminates it. Generations of incredible human beings now from the past, those, and especially our younger generations with lots of ideas. And so we constantly are talking about this notion of allyship. Right? What is allyship? We actually need accomplices, right? We actually need to do the doing, not just the feeling. And how can we do the doing? And what's so amazing about this, and even our part, coming together, but with BSC and also EIRP, is that we come from different spaces, but we all know we need each other to really help our people and planet. And Meg and Ben's book really has got some great examples in there. Please buy the book. Not trying to do a plug here. Hopefully it will be also going to Edgar, which is great, a lived experienced leader. So some of the funding.
Okay, and we've got another one here from Philippe Essel, building an evidence base of what practically be done to influence internally and externally. That's incredibly helpful. So I'm conscious we're coming to time. I'm going to put my my thoughts on these 2 points before we conclude, and just talk about what are some of the practical next steps that we're thinking about. So it strikes me one thing the investment sector, impact investing sector can do that I think is actually quite unique, and I do think there's obviously some similarities for impact investing, but from my perspective, EIP, impact investing, it really is engaging in the mainstream economy and the social economy as well. I think that we should be, it won't just shift power in impact investing. If we take this agenda forward, it could shift power and equities in the wider economy. And I think that's one distinct role that impact investors can play. And I think what will enable us to do this very practically, Ben and Meg and Baljit at CKE and many others, we can see that there's a movement that's been bubbling along for some time here in the UK. There's already a participatory grants network. And I think what will enable it is for us to not just continue this conversation, but continue it around a structured programme of work that we can work together on and harness all the potential we've heard about today. I'm going to say some thank yous and final words, but before I do that, I didn't know whether Baljit and Philippe, our co-host, would like to say any final comments or remarks.
Very quickly, a lot to take away. I think 2 things for me is one, the comment around, letting go as a proactive act and thinking, so what does that mean for BSC? I think related to that, just a reminder, in terms of all the contributions that we've heard, super inspiring and just a reminder also for us at BSC, it's a real opportunity, having that broad exposure that we have, and actually just being aware of what's happening in our portfolio. And I think that sort of brings me back to this importance of actually pulling this together. In our conversations, most of the time people agree on the moral argument and the effectiveness argument. It comes down to sort of, okay, what can I practically actually do? And I think today we've heard about some of these examples, what can be done. And if, what we need to do now is to actually do a better job in pulling this out and actually sharing that more widely.
And
so thanks again. Big
Baljit,
yeah,
thank you. Baljit, very briefly, if that's okay, Baljit, as well.
Yeah, all I would say is I appreciate you all, everyone who's come into this space, our incredible speakers, our incredible brothers and sisters from the United States across the Atlantic. There's incredible work going on. We at the Centre for Knowledge Equity, a small setup. Everyone keeps calling us radical. We're doing all this amazing, innovative work folks, we're just working with good humans who are willing to be brave and bold. Right? That's all it is. That's all
Okay,
it
thank
is.
you. Thank you,
So,
Baljeet.
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so my final thanks obviously to all of you for coming along today. Yeah, I think it shows the level of interest in this event, that you know, significant interest in going forward. Thank you to all of our speakers, and to Ben and Meg for writing the book. And obviously behind every event, there is a team of people running around for weeks before, getting all the tech ready and thinking about the briefs. And I would particularly like to thank Manpreet and Rana from EIP and colleagues at Big Society Capital, who have put a huge amount of work in behind the scenes to prep this event. And Rana is even, I think, started at 4 o'clock in the morning in the US, and yes, Manpreet's they've been the dream team. So thank you to all of you. In terms of next steps, as I said, ourselves, Big Society Capital and Centre for Knowledge Equity will pull together a short report of some of the discussions and some of the ideas that came out, and watch this space. We will be coming back to all of you and tapping on your shoulder, doubtless, to continue to build this movement. But for now, have a great afternoon, folks, and thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.